Good morning, good morning, good morning. Yes. And we have a visitor over here. I want to introduce yourself to her. She'll have forgotten all your names, no doubt. Welcome back from Mexico and all kinds of. All right. What I wanted to do today is something that we haven't talked about in a little while. And it is related to what we've been doing with Proverbs in the sense that Proverbs are meditations on a Judeo-Christian worldview. They're very general and they make a lot of assumptions, but they tell you what we think that the world is really, or what God says the world is really like. That was the basic worldview of our nation at its founding. It was the basic worldview of our nation for the first 175 years or so. It is still the predominant worldview, but it is by no means the overwhelming worldview, and there are alternatives, and one in particular. And I want to talk about that alternative worldview is what I've got it up here. There's an alternative worldview afoot. The point being that there are a lot of things going on in our culture that causes a lot of perplexity. How could people think that? How could people go there? How could people think that that's a good idea? And they wouldn't think it's a good idea if they were still steeped in a Judeo-Christian worldview. It would never occur to them that this is a good idea, which is why it doesn't occur to us that these things are good ideas. But it does to them because they're operating with different assumptions. And they don't begin with a biblical or Judeo-Christian worldview. They're beginning somewhere else. So I want to talk about the assumptions that are being made in this sort of alternative way of looking at the universe. I want to look at some of these things, and I want to compare it to what we would say, what the Judeo-Christian worldview would be on these things, and we'll have a little conversation. But you'll see how these assumptions feed into the kind of cultural changes that are being demanded, or the things that people are embracing where you just look at it and stare and say, how? It's because they're buying into this. Now, why they're buying into this is a different matter, okay? But I just want to look at what are some of the underlying assumptions that are being made in this alternative and what the assumptions were and are for those who have a traditional Judeo-Christian worldview, okay? So let's begin here. I have, 6 or 7 of these, and we'll just go through each of them and talk about them. This doesn't sound bad. Individuals are free to believe as they wish, structure their own personal lives as they wish, provided their beliefs and choices do not impose unwarranted or undue burdens on others. Now, of course, on the one hand, there's the argument about what we mean by unwarranted and undue burden, okay? But the basic idea that people should be free to make their own choices is not something that we're necessarily against. But I think that what should be viewed and what you need to understand is that in this alternative worldview, I put this first. That is, the first thing in the list is personal liberty. Personal liberty and personal autonomy. So, even in the Judeo-Christian worldview, we are interested in people having as much freedom as possible, but that freedom is circumscribed in very different ways than the freedom that is contemplated here, okay? And in a Judeo-Christian worldview, we would not put personal freedom first. What would be first in a Judeo-Christian worldview when you're contemplating the nature of things? What would be first? God. God. And we're not talking about the deep relationship that we have. We just mean conceptually the fact that God exists, creates, and is the explanation for all things. It begins with Him. It does not begin with an individual human being. And in the Western world, it never began. I mean, even with all the talk in the United States and in the founding of America of personal liberty and individual rights and all of that, that was all understood underneath the umbrella of a Judeo-Christian conception of what, for example, in a Judeo-Christian worldview, what is individual liberty ultimately rooted in? God. God made you. God made me. So God is the one. Now, that doesn't mean that God made me, therefore I can do anything. All that means is because God made you and God made me, that limits your ability to limit me, okay? But it doesn't limit God's ability to limit anything. So the whole idea was that the liberty that we enjoy is liberty that is strictly understood within the confines of the reality that God has actually made. So you can't put it first. That means that a lot of things you can contemplate in a Judeo-Christian worldview without any problem. All kinds of limitations on human behavior are not a problem because nobody ever said. In other words, it's the starting position here on this new view that you should have liberty. That's the starting position. The starting position in a biblical worldview is, no, the starting position is God and the world that he has actually made, and whatever liberty you have has got to fit in that. We'll get to your liberty later because other things have to be discussed first. Okay? To use a different kind of an idea, nobody has a right to do wrong. Okay? It's never been recognized in human society that anybody has a right to do wrong. So before we start talking about rights with respect to something, what do we have to know first? What's right and what's wrong? If you dissolve the idea of what's right and what's wrong, then how do you get to the question of what you have a right to do? We don't have a right to do wrong. Everybody agrees that there's a wrong, even those who say there is no wrong. They just have a different idea of how we come about with what's wrong. Okay? So nobody has a right to do wrong. Well, the real question is not what you have a right to do that. It's whether it's wrong or not. If it's wrong, you don't have a right to do it. Okay? If it's right, then presumably you might have a right to do it. Okay?
It might be wrong for you and right for me.
Well, there are times when we can even say that's true. Well, we just can't make that as a general statement, that each one of us has our own. But we'll get to that, because so let's just note that what's important here in this conception, this new conception of reality, is it begins with the idea of personal liberty, and this idea of personal liberty, although it looks at first blush like it's very much like what is enshrined in the Bill of Rights, it's not at all what the founders would have understood. The founders would have understood liberty within the constraints of what God has actually made and the duties that are incumbent upon us by nature, rather than it's open-ended, you have a right to do it unless somebody can give you a good reason not to, and then we'll take a peek at that. Okay? Any thoughts on this? Almost all our arguments in society today, that when people are wanting to do things that other people just find offensive or strange or crazy or whatnot, it all devolves into this idea of rights, and the assumption being is I have a right to do it. Just sort of as a beginning and as a middle and as a final argument. Yes?
It's kind of like when we look at the abortion, so some people think it's right and some people think
Sure,
it's wrong.
yeah, that's a great example. The idea that should even be discussed as a matter of one person's rights is sort of absurd. Or that it's nobody else's business is absurd. And that's just obvious in the case of abortion, but there's a whole range of things where we would say, it's not just your business, it's all of our business. Well, yes, but even behaviors that some people might not consider self-destructive, but if half of the society thinks it is, does the fact that the other half doesn't think it is settle the matter? In other words, unless we all agree that I don't have the right, I have the right. That's basically how it works out. Yes.
Well, some people will say no one has the right to regulate my body in any form. It's like, well, the government actually does that all the time when they tell you not to steal, not to murder, not to, I mean, technically, I mean, that's, you know.
Not to commit suicide?
Yeah, when they put you in jail for doing drugs.
Right.
Yes, these are things that, I mean, look, we can't accuse the adherents of this to necessarily be consistent. But there is a certain assumption here, and the assumption is that my personal liberty is of such a high order that before it can be infringed, we have to have very good reasons recognizable by this group, okay? Now, I mean, a Christian might say the same thing. You shouldn't infringe my rights unless you have very good reasons. But for us, there are lots of very good reasons that are written into the nature of things. But once again, I point out, in the Judeo-Christian concept of things, we do not start with personal liberty. We do not start with personal happiness. We don't start with people. We start with God. People mean nothing until there's God. Rights mean nothing until there's God. What you're all about means nothing until there's God. So we start with God, okay? But this view is atheistic. And I don't mean it's one of its tenets. No, there's no tenet here that we're going to see that says there is no God. We're just going to find that there's no need for God, there's no place for God, and all of its assumptions are arrived at without reference to God, okay? That's really more what I'm talking about. By the way, also, I would say that this is sort of the ideology that is really informing the far left. But it is not only the far left.
Libertarian.
Well, you'll find it on the right. You will find it in Democrats and Republicans. I don't mean they're buying all of it, but I'm saying we're buying different pieces of this, sometimes not knowing what we're buying. Yes, libertarianism on the left and the right is making certain assumptions, and one of those is my personal liberty is absolute. Well, until relatively recently, nobody in this country thought your personal liberty was absolute. Your personal liberty within its range and scope was to be protected, but it is within its range and scope. You don't get to define what that scope is. The scope is already defined for you. When you were born, it was already defined for you. All right, let's take a look at the next step. The concept of religious pluralism. Let's talk about what this means and its implications. Religious beliefs based on revelation from God cannot be the basis of public policy or publicly recognized morality. You can't use the Bible as a basis for passing laws, for example. That would be one. Specifically, in a pluralistic society, the tenets of the Judeo-Christian worldview or any other religious worldview cannot be privileged above other conceptions of reality or morality.
Which basically creates an atheistic.
Well, and that's the thing, is that one of the tricks here, which we'll get to in the next slide, is how we, and look, I'm doing this. I wrote this. Okay, so somebody might say, oh, well, but but I mean, I think that this is fair, and I've tried to be fair here. That their problem isn't, you can't use any kind of what we would consider a religious thought. It's that they're going to define religion a certain way, and what they mean by religion is what is oftentimes referred to as organized religion or some kind of religion based upon a concept of God and a Bible. Now, why would they do that? Because that's what religion in the West is.
They have to separate church and state,
Well,
right?
but the thing is, if we want to talk about separation of church and state, church is a particular kind of religion and a particular understanding of religion, and it is organized. But separation of church and state is a different issue here.
Okay,
Okay? It's related, but it's different.
okay.
The idea of pluralism is we're in a society that lots of people believe lots of different things. Okay? And this is true. The question is, what is the implications of that? What this conception of reality basically says is that there is no reliable knowledge about any God who has spoken to us, and therefore we cannot use any Bibles, any scriptures, or any interpretations of Bibles or scriptures as a basis for public policy, because there's no way to know whether it's true. And because there's no way to know whether it's true, we are now not going to take any one religion. I'm not talking about a denomination or a state religion. I'm talking about any conception of reality that is built on a scripture cannot be privileged about other conceptions of reality.
Is that why we took the Pledge of Allegiance out of school? And, and trying to take "In God We Trust" off?
Let's come back to that. Yeah, it is clearly related, yes.
You embedded in your statement the assumption that there is no way to know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I could have, listen, I could have multiplied the number of these little slides many times as I get to further deeper assumptions. It is an assumption in this worldview, to put it sort of philosophically, that there's no such thing as objective metaphysical truth. We put it that way, okay? The only objective truth is physical things that we can actually measure and touch. But anything beyond that, like the existence of God, right or wrong, the destiny of all things, the ordering, and all of that, those are metaphysical statements, but they cannot be proven.
Therefore, they're false in this.
Well, and in this construction, they're not false. They're just all put on the same level. But what difference is there? Okay, if you're going to put them all on the same level, then what does that mean? That means any public policy that purports or have an obvious basis in any kind of biblical understanding of things is illegitimate.
It makes it hard. That's the reason why there's you can't put Merry Christmas and Happy Thanksgiving, and you remember when you used to go down the street, like you used to see all the shops, and you used to see Merry Christmas, and that used to, and all of a sudden now that's all taken down.
Well, and consider the difference Consider the difference between this. The government saying, we are not going to have an officially recognized holiday called Good Friday, let's say, because that is an overt religious truth, and we just don't think that the government should be doing that. The difference between that and culturally, you're not allowed to say things like Jesus is Lord. Culturally is a much deeper problem. Politically, we do have to juggle the fact that different people believe different things. Politically, we have to do that. And that doesn't mean that we have to do it by lowering them all to the same level, but there does have to be a balance. But if the starting position is all religions basically are equally true or equally false or interchangeable as far as that goes, what have you done with the power of any religion, including the Christian religion, to affect public policy or to affect cultural mindsets? What have you done with it? You have eliminated it can get no traction.
Well, and now in our society, it seems like when we leveled it, now it's just defaulting to secularism.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second. Because I said, no, that's exactly what, if you get rid of God, what do you have left?
Nothing.
No God. So whatever we're going to do has got to be based upon a conception of reality where there is no God. Supposing we say, well, I'm not saying you can't believe in God, but you just can't know anything about him. What's the difference? What's the difference between a reality where there is no God and a reality where, well, maybe there's a God, but we'll never know and you can't know anything about that God? What is the difference between? Practically speaking, what is the difference?
Nothing.
There is no difference. Now, let's look at a Judeo-Christian concept of religious pluralism. Does Judeo-Christianity have a concept of religious pluralism? Yes, but it's different. Obviously, the Judeo-Christian worldview would insist that the Judeo-Christian concept of reality be privileged. Why?
It's revealed by God.
Because it's true. It's true. It's the right one. And you always do well by privileging the truth. Okay? Now, well, but you should have a Judeo-Christianity that doesn't insist upon that. And then I would say, well, then you don't have Judeo-Christianity. Okay? Christianity is not revealed as an opinion that you may hold if you like. It is revealed as the truth. So if you're going to believe it, then there's only one way to believe it, and that's to believe that it's true. It's true for you. It's true for me. It's true for all. It's true always. Or don't bother. Because it doesn't work if you say it's true for me but not for you. That's not biblical Christianity. That's nothing. But that's what this does. This says you can believe it if you want, but you can't say that it's true. Because if you say that it's true, then you're trying to bind me with something I don't believe. Now, in a Judeo-Christian worldview, are we willing to bind people with things they don't believe? No. Yes, all the time. Do we make them believe it? No. So the issue, let's say, since abortion is very easy, are we requiring, if we were in a strict Judeo-Christian worldview, would we require women to believe that a baby is a special creation of God and a human being that can't be killed? Are we requiring women to believe that?
No.
No. What are we requiring?
That they not murder it.
That you not kill it. That's it. And if you say, well, I don't think it's, we say we don't care. I mean, I would prefer that you not want to kill the child because you believe that it's alive. But if you don't believe that, we're still going to forbid you from killing it. And they say, well, we don't agree with that. And I say, I don't care. This is the world in which you live. So a Judeo-Christian worldview is not imposing our beliefs on everybody else. It is imposing a social order that everybody has to live with. So if a Muslim comes and moves into the United States, are we going to require them to believe that the Christian God is the one true God? No. No. Are we going to forbid them to initiate Sharia law? Yes. If you want Sharia law, you have to go somewhere else. Okay? Is it because we... Now, so in a Judeo-Christian worldview, religious pluralism doesn't require that everybody be a Christian or everybody even believe in God. You may live in our society and you may believe whatever you want. But when it comes to the ordering of society, then that is based upon other things, and you're going to have to fit within the same frameworks that everybody else accepts. Okay? So, however, the Judeo-Christian concept is actually very generous toward what other people believe, because we do understand that faith in God is ultimately is not something that can be compelled or should be compelled. Look at how the New Testament commands the church to do what? Preach the gospel, make disciples. How? By preaching, teaching, and baptizing, not by conquering. There's nowhere in the New Testament where there's the slightest, I mean, even in the Old Testament, there's no, you might say, well, what about the conquest of Canaan? Well, look at the conquest of Canaan. Were the Canaanites commanded to believe?
No.
No. They were to be exterminated. That's it. You might say, well, that's even worse. Well, maybe, but that was limited to Canaan, you understand. That was not a command to the Jews to destroy the entire world if they won't believe in you. It was these people in this spot must be eliminated, and you cannot make peace with them.
You must cut out the cancer.
In fact, however, if individual Canaanites joined themselves to the Jews, were they eliminated anyway? They were not. Consider Rahab and Jericho. It was not eliminated, but became a part of Israel. And there are other examples there in the conquest where there were families and towns that converted. Okay, but the point is, in the founding of the American Republic, the thought was not we're going to make everybody Christians. The thought was that the society was generally compatible with Judeo-Christian presuppositions, as England had been, and that we are going to allow a wide variety of expressions of religions to live among us, including even non-Christian religions. Okay? That was not considered something that just can't be done, But the assumption was the basic ordering of society was on a Judeo-Christian understanding of things, which meant what comes first? God. The assumption is that the American Republic makes no sense without God. Our whole concept of self-rule makes no sense as it is put forward in the Declaration of Independence and as the Constitution is outlined. It makes no sense if the American government is really a thing unto itself and not itself under the judgment of God. It was the belief of the founders that God himself is the ultimate protector of individuals, and that government is his agent to protect individuals, not that the government is the thing. Okay? So, but that provided for a wide variety of religious expression, even non-Christian religious expression. Jews were not drummed out of the United States. But there are limits to how much the overall social ordering can be stretched. So,
What do you mean?
well, for example, it's relatively easy to say, well, we have a number of different expressions of Christianity in different denominations. It is very easy to say, we will practice religious neutrality among the various denominations, and we will not have an established church, which is what that was talking about. There was no concept of an established synagogue or mosque or something like that. It was established. We're not going to do that, and we're not going to play favorites among the denominations. You can do that because the denominations all share a worldview. You have different understandings of certain particulars about what God is doing, but the worldview we all shared. So that was not a problem. You could even extend that to Jews who also would basically share the same worldview. That would not be a problem. You could have sort of neutrality among those. But it gets more difficult if you have a Buddhist and you're going to try to be neutral as between Christianity and Buddhism. So total, they do not share a worldview. So how are we going to do this? Are we going to have this community be a Buddhist and other communities be... You can't. You can allow the Buddhists to live. You can allow the Buddhists to have a Buddhist shrine. You can allow the Buddhists to live as a Buddhist, but you can't organize your society at one and the same time to accommodate Buddhism and have that as the basis of ordering, and Christianity and have that as the basis of ordering. At the same time, you can't do it. I will point out that you also cannot have at the same time a secularist worldview where there is no God or God is not relevant, and a Judeo-Christian worldview where God is number one at the same time. You cannot have those. You can have atheists living in the midst. We don't have to drum them out or burn their house down. We don't have to make them believe. But if they insist that society be ordered on their assumptions, well then, either we maintain a Judeo-Christian worldview or we change it, but you can't have both. What I'm not proposing, I'm pointing out, this is what people would like to change it to. Okay? What they will say, though, is that we're not changing it. We're just wanting you to be tolerant of different views. But the idea here, the ideas that they're putting forward, cannot coexist with traditional American society. You can have one or you can have the other, but you can't have them both at the same time.
So they're just wanting it to be no view, just
Let's pause on that for a second, because they're not going to say no view. What they're going to say is no, what they would call religious view. Now, note, what they would call religious view. Let's look at this next one. Naturalism. We've talked about naturalism. It's just the basic belief that everything happens according to natural processes and cause and effect. In other words, it's a way of explaining everything without reference to supernatural or divine. No God is necessary in a naturalistic conception. So if you want to say, if there is no God, how did we get here and what is it all about, then presumably you're some kind of a naturalist. This, and I say here, beliefs reasonably arising from a naturalistic view of the physical universe and not religious in nature, note that, should presumptively be privileged. What would we call a belief reasonably arising out of naturalistic view of the physical universe?
Communism.
I mean, isn't that what we mean by science? Science is explanations of things in a naturalistic point of view. Now, in a Judeo-Christian worldview, there's not any problem with recognizing cause and effect and that sort of thing, as long as it's under the larger purview of, yes, but this is all underneath God. If your explanations, so science is not antagonistic to Christianity at all, unless science claims to have a full explanation for everything, in which case God is no longer necessary, and then they are directly in conflict. But the conflict is not between the data that we find and the Bible. The conflict is between whether we are going to have a God or believe that there is no God. The conflict is before the data even comes in. Now, the trick here is this: naturalism as a philosophy, okay? Now, the way I wrote this is, it is not religious in nature.
It is a religion.
So here's the thing. I say, I'm a Christian. Somebody else says, you're religious. A Jew says, I'm a Jew. And we say, you're religious. A Muslim says, I'm a Muslim. And we say, you're religious. And an atheist says, I'm an atheist. And we say, well, that's not religion. That is just facts. Okay?
Wouldn't you, it takes a lot of energy to be an atheist. It takes a lot of energy to be an atheist. I mean, it's.
And an atheist would agree with you.
Huh?
Atheists would agree.
Yes. And it's actually a religion all its own.
Yeah, that's right. What I'm saying is, from a Judeo-Christian worldview, atheism is a religion.
Yeah.
It's not a religion that has a God.
No, it has no God.
Right, but it is just as much as a religious explanation of the nature of reality. It just has a very different starting point and very different endpoints, but it's still an explanation for the meaning of things. Even if that explanation is there is no meaning to things, okay?
So, I mean, we would say atheist is religious.
Yes.
Yes.
But an atheist
Would not
probably
say-
wouldn't.
No.
They would say, I'm not being religious. I am against religion. But see, it's all a trick of words. When they say something like that, what they mean is, I'm against the kind of religion you have. That is, you believe that there's a God who's spoken to the world and that's what organizes your life. I don't believe that. I'm against religion. But then what we have to say is, okay, well, if that's how we define religion, it's arbitrary. Yes, I believe that God has spoken. And if he has, you can call it religion, you can call it not. I don't care what you call it, it's true. From the atheistic point of view, we look at it and we say, look, you don't have to have a God to have a religious point of view. Everybody has a religious point of view. You can't help it and be a human being.
Yep.
We don't just live, without thought about who we are and what things mean and what's right and wrong and good and bad and so on. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about a worldview. We're talking about very fundamental understandings of things. Now, going back to what I said before, you can have atheists and naturalists existing comfortably, peacefully, and actually enjoy a great deal of prosperity. They can be your neighbors. You can like them. Okay? Nobody is suggesting that if this was a Judeo-Christian society, these people would be rounded up and gotten rid of. No, not at all. What we would be saying, what a Judeo-Christian worldview would say is, you can live in our midst, that's fine. But the way society is going to be ordered is not going to be that. So you're going to have to fit within our conception. And when they say, you have no right to force your beliefs on me, we are going to say, I'm not forcing your beliefs. I don't care if you're an atheist. We're not requiring you to believe anything. However, the 25th of December is a holiday, and it's called Christmas, and we don't care whether you believe in it or not or celebrate, doesn't matter. However, if you try to tell us that we can't celebrate that because that's religious, we're not going to have any holidays because that's what an atheist thinks there is no such thing as a holy day. No, we're not going to order it that way. Now, you can order it that way, but if you're going to order it that way, if you're going to order it as an atheist or as a secularist, you cannot order it in a Judeo-Christian fashion at the same time. It's one or the other. It can't be both. Okay? And understand that the relationship between our culture and our country and our worldview is very, very tight. You can't just change one out for another and not expect that you're going to change everything. Everything will change. As you can see, slowly everything is changing. And the reason why in certain parts it's already changed. Right? So there's this nice exception. If you want to have public policy, what do you have to have in order to back up your public policy? Well, you have to have studies. You have to have experts. You have to have science or some kind of pseudoscience or something. You've got to at least claim that it's science. In today's world. That's what I'm saying is, so a lot of times you will see that I can, well, okay, if I want to make an argument against abortion because God made life and this is life and thou shalt not kill, it won't work. But if I say, well, wait a minute, according to scientific studies, this creature within the mom feels pain. And we can document that it feels pain. Now, is that science? I don't know if that's science or not, but it sounds like it. I'm using data, I'm using studies to show, well, when does life begin? Well, what does science tell us? And that's the question. When you get to matters of human sexuality, what does science tell us? Matters of human sexuality in this concept completely boil down to sociological studies of what percentage of people do this, what percentage of people do that. Okay, so they would look at, in a Judeo-Christian worldview, would say, well, chastity is the order of the day, that's what it has to be. And they'd say, well, that's because of your belief in the Bible, and that's illegitimate. What does science say? And what science would say is, well, X number of people it would have multiple partners if they were permitted to have that. X number of people would be homosexual if they were permitted to have that. X number of people actually believe that they're members of the opposite sex if they were permitted to believe that. Science pretends that it looks and does surveys and finds out that X number of people do all these different things. Okay, and that means these are all natural things. Okay, and they're just spread out like a bell curve, so that you have some of them are more common, some of them are less common, but all of them occur naturally, and therefore we have no basis for saying any of them are right or wrong.
And they will always look at the most primitive society as the most truth.
When it is convenient for them. But oftentimes they look at primitive societies and draw primitive conclusions, but the reality is that even primitive societies are pretty stuck up about sex, actually. And the reason why is because sex is not just about sex. If it were, then we'd say this is a curious little thing about human beings. But what you actually find out is sex is about life and family and society and the ordering of society and so on. And it has enormous consequences. And no society just says, oh, do what you want. There's no concern. Only our society does that. Coming at great cost to the children that are born without parents to take care of them, or the children that aren't born at all. Okay, so anyway, in our society, if you want to argue public policy, you got to get scientific, got to show the studies, got to get the experts to tell you that this is, so psychologists and psychiatrists are the ones who will tell us what is natural, what is healthy, okay? There's only one kind of sex that you're not supposed to practice in our culture. What is that? Well, two. One would be non-consensual, okay? Which is kind of a moral judgment if you think about that. But nevertheless, what's the thing that you're always told to? Safe sex. Okay. And they will say that with moral fervor. Oh, well, enjoy yourselves out there. I mean, even if you're teenagers. But make sure that you're safe. Okay? That's the thing. Because then they have studies to show, well, disease and, well, this and that. Note how these kind of moral arguments are reduced in our society only to those things where there is either scientific data or and I will say it's the appearance of scientific data. And arguments from any statements of God written in a script, a personal God who is making demands on us, a connection between our being created by Him and Him being judge over us, are not legitimate, because they are only legitimate if everybody buys into it, and everybody doesn't buy into it. The Judeo-Christian worldview doesn't care that not everybody buys into it. It's true. That's the only thing that matters. If it's true, then it is a proper basis for the ordering of society. Now, note the difference here. You may not be able to accomplish it, but that's a different matter than whether you think you ought to be able to in principle because it's true. In the secularist side, the issue is it's not true unless there's some kind of scientific, pseudoscientific, some kind of empirical or pretense to an empirical basis for it. Otherwise, it's just opinion. Okay? Note that in our society, if something seems to be shown by scientific studies, you're not allowed to have a contrary opinion, unless you have a contrary scientific study. Okay? But religious views are entirely understood to be matters of opinion. Okay? This is not a biblical worldview. In the biblical worldview, it was well recognized that there were different beliefs. It's not as though the people in the Bible were... Understand that in the New Testament, they were commanded to go out into the whole world. How much of that world believed the way they did? Almost none. Okay? So, I mean, it's not like the early Christians had no idea. Jesus had no idea. You mean not everybody believes this? Well, they knew it quite well. They knew it quite well. They were very much the minority, but they had this advantage. They were right. And that's always been the understanding. Now, of course, this is part of the thing that drives these folks crazy, because to them, that is the height of what? Arrogance. You think you're right. But we're going to say we are compelled by God and the Scripture to insist that we're right. Now, I don't mean my personal view, but I mean the whole thing. And therefore, again, we're not going to demand that other people believe it, but if we're talking about the ordering of society, we don't need everybody to believe everything, but here's the law. Okay? And the law says, we do not allow one man to have 5 wives. If you want 5 wives, move to Saudi Arabia. Okay? But and if you say, well, that's a moral judgment. Well, yes, it is. It's a moral judgment that hasn't given way yet. It will. Okay? But traditionally in our society, there were limits on who you could marry, how many you could marry, what would permit a divorce. And I'm not just talking about the law either. I'm just talking about what people would say, well, shame on you. Okay, let's move on. Naturalism is privileged in this. That is, scientific studies, the appearance of data is privileged. It is presumed to be true, and religious opinions are presumed to be opinion. And anything revolving around a God who reveals is the definition of religion, and therefore opinion, and no religion is better or worse than any other religion. Okay? Totally, totally contrary to Scripture. If you go to battle culturally with these people on their terms, you lose. Because they'll win every single time. If their terms are, all religion is, I mean, you may like it, and you may be able to paint a very pretty picture of it, but in the end, it's just opinion. And we've got facts on our side. And you don't have any facts to demonstrate that God said this. And therefore, it's illegitimate to argue that way. Okay, the essence of being human. The essence of a human being is one's own inner self-conception. You are what you are inwardly. Okay? That is who we really are. A human being has the inherent capacity and the right to define themselves, because you're the only one that knows what you are deep inside, according to their own inner self-conception. And to resist being defined by others or by physical things or social constructs external to them. Now, this is just another element of what's being believed. I don't know that it follows naturally from anything that we've already discussed, but it is what is being believed. That how you conceive of yourself is sacrosanct. And therefore, if I criticize you for how you conceive of yourself, what am I doing? I'm violating you. I'm denying you.
This has been a new, I would say in the past 5-10 years, this last decade, this has been a big, huge
Correct.
wave
Wave of belief, right.
that has been going through.
Sure.
And it's been really affecting our children.
Right. So consider, for example, Judeo-Christian worldview, what do we do with homosexuality? Number one, we consider it, or trans, that's even the, but let's just deal with this first because it's easy. It is clear we say, okay, well, it's wrong. Okay. And it's aberrant. All right. Does that mean that we round them up and shoot them? No. The question in a Judeo-Christian worldview with regard to homosexuality is not do we eliminate it, but we also don't embrace it. The question is, what do we do about it? And you have a wide range of possible answers. One possible answer is we round them up and shoot them. Okay. The other possible answer is we do absolutely nothing. Other answers might be, well, we don't violate their civil rights, but we don't elevate that lifestyle above a traditional heterosexual lifestyle. We might say, okay, well, the sort of don't ask, don't tell. I mean, we're not going to go invade your privacy, but we don't want it public displays, for example. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can do this as a society without violating the basic idea that we're a Judeo-Christian society that believes that this is sinful and wrong and abnormal, but we don't necessarily want to hurt people, or we don't want to do more harm than good, and we can tolerate a certain amount of this. And at different ages and different times in society, we would clamp down more or less on not only this, but also proclivities of men to step out on their wives, for example. In many European societies, this was just expected that men would do this, and it wasn't considered a bad thing unless you got caught and embarrassed your wife. Then it would be. But otherwise, it was just sort of expected that this would be done. And then at other times, societies would take a more puritanical turn. Okay? In other words, there's no one answer. It's not like, well, if you say that we should have a biblical worldview, then you're going to shoot everybody that disagrees with you. And the answer is no. Actually, the Judeo-Christian worldview is actually very tolerant of things, but exactly how tolerant of what things, well, that's for society to determine. Now, this started out, the whole business of homosexuality started out as a question of how much should we tolerate, and maybe we're being too oppressive. Okay? But you can still have that debate. The debate is different now. The debate has nothing to do with how we, even to use that language, tolerate, is deeply offensive. Why? If a homosexual defines himself as a homosexual, then that's what they are. They can't help it. And therefore, who are you to say that they are not that, or to privilege anything above that? This is cruel.
So the slippery slope says, let's do the same with
This is,
pedophilia.
this, well, yeah, there's no, I don't know what the limiting, the limiting principle is here. But the thing is, today, the argument is completely moot in our society because your sexuality is considered your personal domain, your self-conception, and the rest of us have no right whatsoever to tell you what you can or cannot do. That's a very different argument than, okay, we don't like this, and how much should we put up with it? You're not allowed to make an argument like that now. But that would be the traditional way that discussion would go. Not, well, we have to root you out and stop you because we can't have anybody living any way contrary to that. That's never been the position. The idea of trans follows naturally after that. If somebody says I'm a homosexual, you have to respect that, okay? Because that's what they identify themselves as. If somebody else says, well, I'm really a man in a woman's body, or vice versa, you have to respect that. Judeo-Christian worldview has a very different understanding of a human being. And you are very much defined by your externalities. Your interior self is a part of all of that. Okay?
but where you were born, when you were born, who your parents are, whether you are male or female, what the laws of the land are, what God requires of you, regardless of whether you have a personal self-conception about this or not, are immaterial. In a Judeo-Christian worldview, we are all born with obligations to God and to one another. And those obligations will differ depending upon where you're born, how you're born, to whom you're born, where you're growing up, what your job, what your roles are. Husbands have different roles than wives. Parents have different roles than single people. Employers have different roles than employees. We all are born into a web of obligations and duties, and nobody asks us if we want them. If you will not do your duty as a human being, you will pay the consequences, even if you disagree. So the idea that an individual, do I look to externalities to figure out who I am? I'm a man. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And this is what God says about being a man, being a husband, and being a father. And so that's settled. Okay? Well, if I don't feel like that, I said, well, then get with the program, because this is what you are. Well, that's mean. Well, it's not mean. It's actually quite liberating. What's mean is to tell you you are whatever you want to be, and then make a mess of your life. And there's no way to help. Nobody to tell you what you are, what you should do, because you are whatever you do. That's cruel. It's not true. So if I'm a creation of God, who decides what I'm about? God decides what I'm about. Where do I look then to find out who I am and what I am to do and how I'm to live? I look to God. I don't look here. I look to God. If I look here, I'm going to see things that are aligned right, and I'm going to see things that are aligned wrong. I need to fix the things that are aligned wrong, okay? How do I know it's right and wrong? Well, God has told me these things. And that gives me traction in my life and helps me to understand who I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be aiming for. And not only me, you too. I have to count on you to know what you are. You have to count on me to know what I am. We both have to count on one another to look to God to figure out what is the duty of a human being so that we can do it or try. In a Judeo-Christian worldview, there's such a thing as success and failure to be what you should be. In this conception, just whatever you say is, in this conception, the only way you fail is by failing to be yourself. Okay? All right, better quit. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, you've given us truth upon which we can order our society and live well with one another and with you. We pray, Lord, that you would bless us with wisdom from your word. And help us, oh Lord, help us to understand that the conflicts that are in our society are something much, much deeper than just differences of opinion about how we ought to live. The differences of opinion about what reality is really like and what a human being really is. We pray, Lord, that you've given us the truth. Help us to know that it's truth and to live like it's the truth and follow it like it's the truth and be proud of it because it is true. Amen.